everyone, and welcome to our May Open Psychology Research Centre research talk. So tonight's talk is going to be delivered by Professor Lara Frumkin, who has been at the OU since 2018. Prior to that, before she came to the UK, she used to work for the US Department of Justice and in intelligence. And apparently she can't tell us what she actually did, otherwise she might have to kill us. So, so it's all very secretive. But now she's an academic and she does fantastic research looking at catastrophizing, terrorism, and tonight she's going to talk to us about how accents can influence decisions in the courtroom. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Lara. Oh, and by the way, there will be time for questions at the end of the talk. Okay, take it away, Lara.
Thank you, Trina. Thank you for the lovely introduction. Thank you for inviting me to speak. And thank you to everyone for coming along tonight to hear my talk on accents in the courtroom. Now, thinking really broadly about accents, I think they're fun and they're fascinating, and I love listening to people speak with different accents. But there are instances when they really could be detrimental for us. And that could be in the courtroom or in other high-stakes settings, like job interviews or in particular classroom settings. I'm going to focus just on the courtroom bit for tonight. When you think about what happens in a courtroom, people make decisions, people make judgments all the time. They make, obviously, the guilty or not guilty judgment, which is the most crucial one, but they also make judgments about what they think about a particular person, what characteristics a witness might have or a defendant might have. And some of those are based on kind of valid information that they should be based on, like the argument that the defense or prosecution make. It could also be based on evidence or the strength of evidence, but they could be based on extra legal factors as well. And extra legal factors are irrelevant factors, ones that shouldn't have a role in the decisions we're making in the court. One of those extra legal factors is accents, because it doesn't really matter how somebody says something. If what they're saying is relevant to the court or to the decision, it's the content of the message that's important. So what I'm going to do over the next 40 minutes or so is talk first about a few cases where it looks like accent played a role in specific court cases. I'm then going to talk about some general public perception surveys on accents and how they're thought about and rated in this country. I'm then going to talk about some specific studies that I've done with some colleagues on accents in mock courtrooms. And I'll finish up, hopefully on a slightly more positive note, related to what we might be able to do to reduce accent bias in the courts. So hopefully my slide has gone forward and you can see a picture of a tube. Please do let me know if not. So the first case I want to talk about is a tribunal between Mr. Khawaja and Transport for London. Now, this is a case where there's a very lengthy back and forth between Mr. Khawaja and his boss. Eventually, he raised a grievance and it went to a work tribunal. If you're interested in what happened, I can tell you about that later, but the purpose of my talking about it now is what happened related to accent. So Mr. Khawaja wanted to attend a few things called conference calls and operations center huddles, and he wanted to attend these because they would be useful for training and development opportunities. So really for him to learn more and in terms of possible promotion. He was denied being able to do this by his line manager, who said the quote on the screen, and I will just read it. "Since English is not your first language, I did not assign you to attend any conference calls or operations center huddles. I think that you may give the wrong information due to your lack of command of the English language." So absolutely being denied the ability to to do something for possible promotion based on the way that he spoke. You might know in the UK, we have something called the UK Equality Act, and part of this is protecting particular characteristics, which basically means that people are legally protected from discrimination in the workplace and a wider society based on a number of characteristics. These characteristics are age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion and belief, sex and sexual orientation. Accent is not one of them. Right? Now, there are some things there that might be related to or connected to accent, but if there's an accent-based discrimination alone, it is not necessarily protected under these characteristics. So for Mr. Kawaja, that accent issue couldn't really be one of the relevant features. I'm going to move on now to the next case, which is a case in the US. This is Zimmerman versus the state of Florida. This is a case you might have heard of because it comes up related to Black Lives Matter. We're only going to be talking about it related to the accent, but I'll just briefly tell you about the case in case you haven't heard of it before. So this, hopefully you can see my mouse as well. The young man at the bottom, whose face my mouse is on right now in the hoodie, is named Trayvon Martin. He was fatally shot by the man in the suit, George Zimmerman. They came across each other while they were walking through a neighborhood, through a bunch of houses. At the time that they came across each other, Trayvon Martin was on the phone to his friend, Rachel Jeantel, the woman at the top. So she ended up going to court to testify on behalf of the prosecution in this case. So what happened was George Zimmerman became the defendant in a case for murder or manslaughter, and the prosecution asked Rachel to relay what it was that happened and what she heard leading up to Trayvon's death. Rachel Jeantel testified for nearly 6 hours, which is a long time. And then the jurors deliberated for 16 hours before delivering an acquittal verdict for George Zimmerman. The news press was horrible to Rachel Jeantel while she was giving her testimony. They were condescending towards her appearance. They were condescending towards the way that she spoke. And there are a number of different things in terms of the way that she spoke that they were condescending about. Now, Rachel's accent is a combination of African-American Vernacular English, or AAVE, and Creole. This is not kind of the standard American accent, if you will, which would be much more the way I speak, so general American English or standard American English. After the case, some of the jurors were asked about Rachel's testimony, and what researchers said after speaking with people is that Rachel couldn't be understood. There was a language barrier, and when that happened, the jury probably wrote her off as being uneducated, unintelligible, and an unreliable witness. So this really does sound like a case of language-based discrimination. If Rachel Jeantel spoke a different language, so not English, but let's say French, there would have been a translator in the court. And so somebody would have been translating, most likely into general American English, for the jury. So it really does seem like there was something that was going on here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play just 10-15 seconds of Rachel's testimony when she was on the stand. And what I'd like you to do on the chat is put in two things, ideally. One, can you understand what she's saying? And second, can you glean any characteristics about Rachel based on how she's speaking? She's a little bit quiet, so you might want to turn up your microphones. Okay, so does anyone have any thoughts about how she spoke? Could you understand her or not? Thanks, Jim and Lawrence. I can see you can both understand her. And a bunch of people are saying that you can understand. Yeah. I can too. I can easily understand her. It might not be the accent that any of us speak with, but she is perfectly understandable. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Thank you. I'm going to go on to the final of the cases, and this one isn't a case per se, but this is research that was done related to a courtroom. So again, this is in the US in Philadelphia, which is in Pennsylvania. And I will preface this by saying that in Philadelphia, the population is about 40% African American, 36% white, and the rest are other races. Philadelphia transcribers, or people who write down what's being said in a court, were found to incorrectly record both defendants and witnesses who were speaking with AAVE, so quite similar to what Rachel Jeantel was speaking with. They are missing words, they are missing context, they were misunderstanding what particular phrases meant. So we have people whose job it is to understand and accurately record what's happening in a court, and they're not getting it right. The jurors who we brought in, or not we, but that the criminal justice system brought in, might be AAVE speakers, they might not. And so we're asking people to recognize, understand, and stay alert for an entire trial where stenographers or transcribers aren't accurately getting the information. So we can see some elements of problems in courts related to language and related to accent specifically. Now, the next thing I want to do is have you listen to 3 segments of speech again. And the first one is quite quiet. Each one's about 6 to 8 seconds long. What I'll do is I'll play them, and once you've heard each one, could you write down in the chat what you think about the person based on the way the person speaks? I don't need to know about understandability, although you could say that if you want, but I really want to know what characteristics you are gleaning about the person based on the speech. So here's the first quiet one. Okay, so if you could just write down what you think about that person. I'll tell you who they are at the end, which you might be able to guess. Educated, very posh. Well-spoken, lots of poshes, an older gentleman. Yes, Jim, I'll come back to that after. Refined, British, coming from England. Yeah, absolutely. Privileged, older, and educated. I'm thinking a few of you probably know who this is. Yep, and received pronunciation, upper class in English, and public school educated, absolutely. I'm going to play the second one now, which is louder. Okay, and this one. Friendly. Less refined, British, Northern, strong, confident, Northern accent, casual. Yorkshire, spoke more normally, more common. Now the first one, working class, British and Northern. Great, thanks. And the third one, which is also, again, a louder recording than that first one. Okay, and that one, a Londoner. American English, a trader, Southeast England, like a London bloke, youngish, South London, North London, London. Do you think this person sounds educated or less educated? Possibly Black, but lived in England their whole life. Less educated. An everyday person, Southerner. Could be either educated, difficult to tell. Well, that's That's actually good, because many people will jump to conclusions based on what somebody sounds like, whether they're educated or not, and not public school educated. Yeah. So I'll tell you who the three are, but you might have guessed anyway. The first one is King Charles. Second one is Angela Rayner, who's from Manchester. And the third one, Rio Ferdinand. Yep, very good. Rio Ferdinand, absolutely. Right. So if you like this sort of thing, there is an OU online video, or not video, audio really, that you can listen to, which is an accents quiz. I've put the URL down here. What it is, it's a series of short clips of accents of people speaking with different accents, all from the UK, and you get to choose which accent you think it is. So you might hear a short clip and you would have to say whether the person is from London or from Yorkshire or from West Country, something like that. And then after, it gives you kind of a sentence on what research has found about ratings and judgments about people from those places based on their accent. So if you're interested, that might be something to look at. Oh, okay. Now, the reason I was asking about the accents and how we make decisions is lots of people make decisions based very quickly on hearing how somebody speaks. And one of the ways to explain this is accent prestige theory. There are others as well. Accent prestige theory talks about two dimensions of how we think about accents, one based on a status dimension and one based on solidarity. The status dimension fits very well with those high-class, posh accents. So things like the Queen's English or received pronunciation, or standard English, or sometimes called standard Southern British English. And what we tend to think of for people with those accents is that they're highly educated, they're very intelligent, they're successful, and they come from high social classes. The other dimension is solidarity, and this is one where people sound like us, or there's something in there that sounds similar enough to our friends or somebody who we like. So we tend to have that solidarity dimension, or when we have that solidarity dimension, we think about people as being friendly, trustworthy, and kind. And much of this comes out of our social categorization of people. We will also say, if there are any linguists who are listening, there are slight differences between, let's say, the Queen's English, received pronunciation, standard Southern British English. For the purposes of this talk, I've just grouped them all together because those differences aren't really what I'm looking at. It's much more the status versus the solidarity components. So I'm now going to move to talking a bit about public perceptions of accents. And there have been a number of public surveys that have been done in the UK over the past 50 years looking at how people rate accents. I've only used two recent ones, 2007 and then 2022, but do know that these are quite similar to what people were finding in the 1970s. Now, this is either a good or bad thing, that the opinions we have about accents are pretty stable over time. The bad thing is, if you have an accent that's from a place that's not been thought of as desirable in the 1970s, still you end up being rated relatively poorer than if you come from a place where the accent is thought well of. So I'll describe what this table is. So this study looked at 34 different accents, primarily UK accents. There are a few non-UK ones, so you'll see French and German. Of the 34, the accents are listed in the second column alphabetically, and then in the third and fourth column, you'll see the ratings for social attractiveness and prestige. These were ranked on a 1 to 7 scale, 1 being not at all attractive or not at all prestigious, to 7, very attractive or very prestigious. And the first number that you see in those columns is that actual number that the participants rank the accent as. And then the second number in parentheses is the rank order between 1 being the best and 34 being the least well ranked of the accents. So there are a few that I want to pull out, but of course, feel free to find your own accent in there and see how it was ranked. So accents that are identical to your own, that's that solidarity component. It is ranked second in attractiveness and third in prestige. The Birmingham accent, or the Brummie accent, consistently rated incredibly poorly at the bottom or really close to the bottom. So in this survey ranked 34 out of 34 for both attractiveness and prestige. And I am sorry to anyone who's from Birmingham. This is just what studies keep on finding. The London accent for Coupland and Bishop grouped together a number of different London dialects. So ranked 22nd in attractiveness and 6th in prestige. And then the Queen's English and Standard English, for our purposes, again, I'm just grouping them together. So in terms of attractiveness, ranked 7th and 1st, and in terms of prestige, 1st and 2nd, which is what you would expect if you think back to accent prestige theory in terms of that status dimension. Now, we fast forward 15 years to 2022, and we're finding very much the same thing. This study, again, on a 1 to 7 scale, the only difference is the way that they've displayed their information. So here what they've done is they have ranked the accent in this first column. So you can see from 1 to 38. They have additional 4 accents. That London accent has been broken up a little bit. And then the accent, obviously rank ordered, then the prestige rating, then the accent for the pleasantness rating. They've called it pleasantness rather than attractiveness. So you can see Queen's English, RP, and an accent similar to your own ranked very highly between 1st and 5th. The London accent, here the one that I've pulled out is Multicultural London English, or MLE. This is an accent that the younger working class people tend to speak in London. Some older people speak it as well, and there are different accents. Some people, although few, still speak Cockney. Some people speak more of an estuary accent. But again, that's kind of a linguist sort of thing. So we'll just go with MLE for the moment, and those are ranked 19th and 24th for prestige and pleasantness. And then again, right down near the bottom, that Brummie accent ranked 38th and 37th. So keep in mind these public perceptions or public opinions about accent. And what I'm going to do now is talk to you about a few different studies that some colleagues and I have done related to accents. So these are studies that we've done using mock courtrooms. And the reason for that, as you probably know, is that we can't do research with actual court trials. So for this first study that I did with my colleague Amanda Thompson, we looked at ratings of standard Southern British English, multicultural London English, and the Birmingham accent. We looked at a number of ratings of favorability. So how accurate was our speaker, how credible, how deceptive. Obviously, the less deceptive they are, the more positively or favorably they're thought about. How prestigious is the accent? And then we looked at guilt and sentence length. What we wanted to do with this study is we wanted to look at witnesses rather than defendants, because we didn't want to group some of the stereotypes about what defendants or what accents might be associated with criminality. So we used a witness instead, a witness who was in the wrong place at the wrong time and found themselves in court giving testimony. So not quite like Rachel Jeantel, who was a friend of Trayvon Martin, but this is just a passerby who saw this. For this study, well, for mock courtroom studies, you can do a number of different things. You could do a vignette that people read, but obviously if you're doing something related to accents, that doesn't work. So you can have either audio or video mock scenarios. So for this one, we used a video. We hired one actor, and because he was an actor, he could do all 3 accents for us. So SSBE, MLE, and the Brummie accent. We created a stage. Again, he was an actor, so we were able to use his workplace to create a mock courtroom. We put him on the stand and we had him do all 3 accents. So we were able to control for the sound of his voice, his age, his appearance, what he was wearing. So we just had him do all 3 of the accents the same day. We videoed that, and then we showed our participants one of the 3. So either SSBE or MLE or the Brummie accent. And what we found, well, what we expected to find was that SSBE, based on status, and MLE, based on solidarity, would be rated far better than the Brummie accent. So that would be for those first 4 sets of bars. We also thought, because this was a witness for the prosecution, that the higher ratings of guilt for our witness would again be indicative of those strong ratings of favorability. I suppose it's a positive that even though we found some significance, that did not translate from favorability ratings to guilty verdicts. So while not good for us as a study, good that we found that the way you think about a witness might not be related directly to whether you convict or acquit someone. Now, what we did find was that SSBE was rated more favorably than MLE on accuracy, credibility, and prestige. I also think I forgot to say the study was conducted in London, so our participants were primarily MLE speakers, so that would have been that solidarity dimension. We did not find higher ratings, though, for MLE. So the solidarity dimension did not bear out, though status did on some of those variables. SSBE was also rated more highly than the Birmingham accent on accuracy and prestige, but not for the other variables. So we had some findings, but it wasn't exactly what we had expected to find. I then did another study with a colleague, Anna Stone, and this one we looked at 2 accents, so SSBE and MLE, but then we also put in a few other variables. We wanted to look at age, so younger and older witnesses, and then race, so Black and white witnesses. And what we wanted to see first is, are there differences as we would expect? And then secondly, are there any interaction effects? So would some people who are younger with a less good accent still be rated more favorably? So that was the sort of thing we were looking at. And I'll just briefly describe the study because it's slightly more complex, I think, than the previous one I described. So this one, we had audio only. There was no video, and we had 8 different conditions, which I'll go through in a moment. Because we had Black and white witnesses, we did not want to use the same actor to voice all of those. So instead, what we did was we got 16 actors, 2 for each condition. And in that way, we could hopefully ensure that it wasn't the tone or the frequency or the nasalness of one actor's voice that was making the difference. So we had 2 people doing each one. Our participants heard 4 pieces of testimony from 4 different witnesses, but only heard either Black witnesses or white witnesses. We never gave them some Black and some white witnesses to listen to. Another variable that we included in this was our participant race, whether our participant was Black or white. So for our participants who were in the condition where they heard the Black witness, the 4 conditions that they would hear were a Black younger witness who's 20 to 25 years old, who spoke SSBE, and a Black younger witness who spoke MLE, and a Black older witness who spoke SSBE, and finally, a Black older witness who spoke MLE. It would be absolutely the same for the people who were in the white witness condition. They'd hear the same 4 conditions, but they would only hear the white witness. So for this, what we did was we combined those different favorability ratings that I showed you a few slides ago. What we found was an effective accent. So SSBE was rated better than MLE. We also found an effective race. Our white witness was better rated than our Black witness. But we found 2 interactions related to race, and I'm going to, they're right there on the screen, but I'm going to show you in a bar chart what those were as well. So the first one is a interaction between accent, witness race, and participant race. So over here, you can see the favorability ratings. These first 4 bars, you can see the white participant, and the second set of 4 bars is our Black participant. So that's not our witness at all. That's the people who participate in the study. And then the different bars. So the dark blue is our SSBE white witness, light blue, MLE white witness, green, SSBE Black witness, and orange, MLE Black witness. So hopefully you can see that the patterns that emerged are relatively similar, but more pronounced for our Black participant. But the other thing that you can see is that our white SSBE speaker is rated quite favorably by both our white and our Black participants. Our Black SSBE speaker is not rated as well by our white participants, but is rated just as well by our Black participants. So there's a own race liking, basically. When you hear somebody speaking with that posh accent who comes from your own race, they are rated highly. But we also see that our Black participant rates highly somebody who is another race, white, speaking with that same high class or posh accent. The other thing to note is that there is a larger within race difference when somebody is speaking SSBE versus MLE. So here you can see for the white participant, the difference between the white SSBE and white MLE speaker is more pronounced than it is for the Black witnesses. And you can see with our Black participant, the difference is more pronounced for our Black witnesses than amongst our white witnesses. The other finding that we had was related to age and race. And this is one that my colleague and I have thought about for a good long time, and we still don't really know what to make of it. So here again is our white witness and our Black witness. So this one is not looking at participants, but at our witnesses. And what we found is that our white older witness and our white younger witness and our Black younger witness were all rated equally in terms of favorability, but our Black older witness was not. He was rated significantly less well than any of the three other conditions. So we don't know what it is about the Black older witness that our participants didn't like as much. And I think this could have some real impact in the courtroom if we have older Black witnesses showing up in court. Obviously, this was from a lab-based study. We don't know what would happen in actual court, but to have this finding was interesting enough for us to spend some time talking about this. Now, the last study I want to talk about is one that is still in progress, and I'm working with some colleagues at the OU, including Trina, on this one. We have a number of different conditions, and I'm only going to talk about 2 different conditions. This is looking at defendants rather than witnesses. We also have some favorability ratings, but we haven't fully analyzed those. So those would be the same sorts of favorability ratings that I spoke about before, how accurate someone is, how credible, how prestigious. For this, the part that I'm going to talk about is just related to guilty and non-guilty verdicts. So we have the MLE accent, and then in a moment I'll show you the SSBE accent. For this study, what we did is we had a short vignette which had written testimony from a police inspector and from a witness, and then audio testimony from our defendant. So here again, we're only looking at the defendant. We had 2 actors voice the pieces of defendant testimony, 1 Black actor and 1 white actor, and we had each of those actors do both the MLE accent and the SSB accent. Again, because they were actors, they were able to do both accents quite well. And then we had our participants read some of the testimony and then listen to the audio of the defendant's bit of testimony. So hopefully what you can see here is that the first chart is our white participants, the second one is our Black participants, and the dark blue bar is not guilty verdicts, and the light blue bar is guilty verdicts. So we have our, and these numbers are just the numbers of our participants who actually said guilty versus not guilty. So when our white participants listened to our Black defendant, they were more likely to say that Black defendant was guilty than not guilty. And when they were listening to our white defendant, they were more likely to say our white defendant was not guilty than guilty. So we are seeing an own race bias towards not guilty and an other race bias towards more guilty verdicts. And you can see the same thing with our Black participants in that they gave the Black defendant more guilty verdicts, more not guilty verdicts than guilty, and gave our white defendant more guilty verdicts than not. So again, the same own race bias that if it's somebody who speaks MLE and they're a defendant in court, we're going to be more lenient on guilt versus acquittal or not guilty if they come from our own race. Now, if I go to the SSBE accent, we see that exact same pattern with our white participants than with our with our white participants. So our white participants, even when our defendants speak with SSBE, we're more likely to say that our Black defendant is guilty rather than not guilty, and our white defendant is not guilty rather than guilty. For our Black participants, we are more likely to say, just like with the MLE accent, our Black defendant is not guilty rather than guilty. But interestingly, our Black participants are also more willing to say our white defendant speaking with the SSBE accent is not guilty as opposed to guilty. So it's this set of bars right here that's really interesting. We've been going with, we're more likely to say something about our own race versus the other race, except when it's Black listeners, white defendants with that very formal high status accent. Like I said, this work is still in progress. We've got a lot more analysis to do, but it's just some early findings on this one. So just in the final few minutes, I want to talk a bit about accent reduction, or, well, I guess some of it is accent reduction, but accent reduction in bias. So what can we do to reduce that bias that we're seeing? And I think it's a really hard one. There are people who are thinking about this and looking into this. One question comes up, is the onus on the speaker to reduce their bias? I'm sure you know people who have a phone voice, which isn't their actual voice when they speak, or they might have their workplace voice where they're not using their normal everyday accent that they use when they speak to their friends. Should we have speakers change the way they speak so that they can communicate better, or so they sound more formal or more educated? Is there something in that status sort of thing? There are a number of accent reduction programs, and there are people who attend these programs to try to reduce their accent. Is that something that we as a society want to push or not? Some people do this to get ahead in work, right? So that is something that could be done. Whether we think it's right or not is perhaps a different matter. The other issue that we have with asking speakers to change the way they speak is that your accent is part of who you are. It's part of your identity. And are we asking people to change their identity, even temporarily, to navigate their workplace or navigate a court or navigate their everyday world? And is that really what we should be doing? Conversely, should the onus be on the listener to spend more time trying to understand? We pretty much all said we could understand Rachel Jeantel. The jury in the Zimmerman case said they couldn't understand her. Now, maybe they should have tried harder, but it's hard to force people to try harder. And there could be a number of reasons why they didn't understand her, even though we could. So perhaps we could push this back onto the listener, but I don't know if that's really a long-term solution. We might need to think about other sorts of strategies. So some other things we can do is we could raise awareness. We have seen for 50 years that we rate people differently and we rate accents differently in this country. This isn't new information, but is that information getting out there for people to really think about and try to be accountable, listeners to be accountable for this when they're speaking to other people? How can we raise awareness about this even more? We could identify irrelevant information. Accent is an extra legal factor. Do we go into the courts and say, there are a number of things that might influence the decisions and judgments that you make? Accent's one of them. Be aware of that. Would that alone be enough? And we say that every single time. Would we have flyers that we send out about this? So something to think about. We could commit to fairness and objectivity in a different sort of way than we are already. Of course, the court system has committed to being objective and fair. But are there other things that we can do in terms of additional instructions or something else to try and increase that objectivity? We could increase accountability. This is one that I think is a bit hard in the courtroom. What some people are doing in other high stake settings like job interviews is they're having people write down reasons as to why they chose to hire someone or not. So if accent is one of those things, people might have to jump through a few hoops or bend backwards to try and show that there isn't an accent-related bias, or they just say there's accent-related bias. We can't really say that to juries, right? Because juries don't have to tell us why they made a decision. So I don't know if there's some other way to get around this. And if there is, I would love to hear it because I haven't come up with one. And then finally, some sort of appeal to multiculturalism. We are an increasingly multicultural society. drawing attention to the diversity, drawing attention to the positive benefits of that might start to make a difference. Certainly in some places, it's more multicultural. You hear a wider range and variety of accents than you do in other places. Trying to capitalize on that might make a difference, but after you say it a few times, it might start to just become part of the noise. So thinking about how we can continually do that to try and make people aware of how we make decisions and what decisions we're making in a courtroom might be something to think about. And I'd like to thank my co-authors who have done a lot of work on all of this research with me. Thank you to them. I do have a list of references, so all the papers that I talked about, mine and others, are in this reference sheet. And thank you very much.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Lara. Thank you very much. That's great. That's really, really interesting. And I just thought I would open it out if anybody has got questions. I can see that Jim looks like he's put his hand up already. Jim, did you want to come in? I think I might have to unmute you. Yes, I can allow your microphone, Jim, if you want to, or you can put a question in the chat if you want.
Yeah, I did put the question in the chat. Thank you. A little bit cheeky of me, Lara, because obviously we work together, including on things like this. But I wonder, when you're talking about the Trayvon Martin case, and we could all understand, so even though we're not Americans, the trial presumably took place somewhere that was fairly local to where, so it should be a familiar accent to people who lived in that area. And I also know that there's a lot of jury selection goes on in the States. So is that something that lawyers consider when they're doing jury selection? Will a defense maybe try and, or whichever side it is, like, okay, my client has this particular accent, I want to make sure the jury can understand what they're saying. And so when you're doing that voir dire, is that maybe something they listen out for and include, whether it's directly through accent or indications of class or social solidarity or something?
I would say yes. My friends who are lawyers in the US would say that would be something they would try to do, but I'm working with a very small sample. But yeah, I think absolutely they would. And you're right, the trial was quite local. In that particular case, there was probably a level of racism as well, which perhaps wouldn't be that surprising. But yeah, I think certainly if I were a lawyer, I would do everything in my power to advocate for my client. As a psychologist, Jim, of course, we try to do this all in an unbiased way.
Yeah, and I guess it's part of the job the way it's done in the States, isn't it? That you take any advantage you get, because like you say, you have to serve your client in the best way you can. And if that means what would look to us with a random jury selection system like jury rigging is just perfectly normal and part and parcel of the US court system, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I know. There's not much I can do other than sigh and say, yeah, I agree with you, Jim.
Thanks, Lara.
Thank you. Shall I stop sharing, Trina?
Yeah, you could do. Is there any other questions, or maybe I should take chair's privilege and jump in? I thought it was really interesting, kind of your last point about what do we do about this? Should people be trying to change their accent, or is it about public awareness? And I guess I'm thinking from my own perspective of having a partner who is a Glaswegian who's been living in England now for over 12 years, and how he's had to adapt his accent just to be understood, and he still does on a daily basis. Whenever he wants to ask Google anything, has to put on an English accent effectively to communicate with Google. So it's a really interesting issue of how do we get around that, and
yeah, I absolutely agree, and I do absolutely feel for him. Some of the research that I didn't present, but there is research that looks at strength of accent as well. So there are some accents that are easier to understand, but then depending on how strong the accent is, that can make a difference too. And I'll also just add in, when I first moved to the UK, I didn't change my accent, but I absolutely slowed down on saying particular words because there are some letter combinations that I would just slur and people misunderstood them. I don't know if it's the same for your partner, that's particular things, or it's just across the board everything.
Yes, definitely slowing down and enunciating in a clearer kind of way, I guess, I think. Yeah. Is there any other questions? There's a comment here. I don't know, can you see the chat, Lara? Instead of me reading it out.
Yeah, I can. I'm just reading it. I think that's a great idea. Yeah, so I'm hoping everyone can read it. So I'm now just answering, but having people watch videos of actors, I think that would be a great thing to do. And certainly, we're not the only ones doing this sort of research. So there is becoming quite a wealth of accent databases that people can listen to. So yeah, I really like that.
Another thing I was wondering as well was, obviously, people in some of the studies that you were talking about, first of all, when you were comparing the accent and people were explicitly obviously judging them, do you think there's a slight, almost like unconscious bias when it comes to accents as well? I think, do you think people, perhaps they're not even conscious that they are being biased about the accent? Because it's not always as overt as, the color of somebody's skin, is it? It's not. I mean, sometimes it can be, but it's it's different, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and I absolutely agree with you. And I think there are times when people are not, they're not aware that they're doing it. And also, I think different people are different. So, I can't remember exactly what it was, but Jim put a comment in the chat about being an anti monarchist, not wanting to say something. Whereas, I actually love that sort of accent. So every time I hear it, I think, oh, that sounds so wonderful. Whereas my guess is Jim would be completely the opposite.
Yeah.
So yeah, I absolutely do think that.
There's a question from Hannah Davidson in the Q&A saying, do you know whether telling people that their accents can affect their judgments can make a difference?
Yes and no. So it can. There has been some research on that out of the US. And what they found is that it can make a difference in terms of credibility and how credible you think the speaker is, but not in terms of how truthful you find the person's speech. So it's a great question, but it does become a very nuanced sort of thing on what criteria. And I can put, I can't remember the entire reference, but I can put at least the authors of that one in the chat. I think it's 2010, but it might be something like 2009. So that one actually was looking at foreign accents, but it was looking at telling people, more or less, it wasn't exactly your question, Hannah, but was telling people about, you could be biased based on this accent. And so finding some difference.
Oh, there's another question from Olga here. It's seems like accent is a cue for education level. Does this make a difference in other settings except the courtroom, like the education system?
Yes, it absolutely does. And there's a whole body of research out of the university in the UK that will come to me looking at employment, actually, rather than educational settings. And it's related to lawyers and possibly doctors as well, but definitely lawyers or people who've recently qualified as lawyers not being offered interviews based in part where they're from, or once they've been offered interviews, not getting the job. There was another study that was done in the US, but maybe it was 20 years ago. And this was looking at people renting accommodation. And there was a researcher who called and just used different accents. So he used of my accent, he used AAVE, and then he used a Latino accent. And what he found is when he called the exact same property, sometimes 3 days in a row, he was told that the property was already given away if he was speaking with AAVE or the Latino accent compared to general American English. So even in renting a house, it makes a difference also.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a great question though, both Hannah and Olga's.
Yeah.
And Jim's yours, of course.
We've got time for another question if anybody else has a question. Oh,
I've just read what Jeanette has written. Yep. Absolutely, I agree. I don't know if this helps or not, but you're right. The Essex accent has not been terribly well rated. I don't know if you remember from that slide that I showed. German accent does tend to be rated slightly better. But absolutely the RP one for those incredibly competitive clinical psychology placements. In 2022, you're right. Essex was below Birmingham. And I'm never sure whether I'm happy to see that slight shift. I'm happy for the Brummies, but not in this case for Essex.
With that study, who was doing the ratings?
That was general public. So I want to say the 2007 one, they hired someone, not Qualtrics, but a company like Qualtrics to go and do it. And I think in 2022, it was something similar. But in 2022, they had a much smaller sample. So they had maybe somewhere between 800 and 1,000 members of the public. But the 2007, they had close to 5,000 people.
Okay. But could you tell where they were from, those people that were asked to do the ratings?
Yes, though you are testing my memory here,
Sorry,
Trina. I think they
I'm
tried to get... No, it's not. I think
there was definitely like an own accent bias, wasn't there? You kind of rated your own people who had a similar accent to you. But I was thinking, if you were to do that study up in Glasgow, for instance, I'm sure you'd get different results than if you did it in Devon or you know what I mean?
Yeah, you would absolutely. And they did collect demographics. And so I think what they did is they went across the country and then people would say, I'm from Glasgow. And when they rated the Glaswegian accent, that was the own accent. And then when they rated, let's say, the Edinburgh or the Lancashire accent, that's where there was the difference.
But even within Glasgow, there's different types. There's a posh Glaswegian accent, and there's like an East End kind of that's considered definitely not posh. So it's there's lots of variations within regional accents, isn't there?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Which actually perhaps is more nuanced, that local people would get those slight different regional accents, whereas somebody from England would just say, well, they're just all Glaswegians,
Yeah, well, absolutely. And the first time I heard Angela Rayner from Manchester, I just went with, she's Northern, right? Which is a very broad, sweeping generalization. Sure, she is, but so are a lot of other accents.
Yeah. Maybe we need a psycholinguist as well that studies accents.
Yes.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you. I just want to say thank you again for a really fascinating talk. It's been really, really good. And I think we will let you go and have your lovely cider now if you want. So,
thank you.
Thank you all for coming along. So this is the last talk of the academic year, but we will be back in October with a new series of talks. So thank you all for coming along, and thanks again, Lara, for a fantastic talk.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, thanks everybody. Good night. going to switch. I'll end the meeting now. Okay. Bye. Bye.